Chapter 4. At the first casual glance you would not have taken the prince for an old man at all. It was only on a closer and more attentive inspection that you discerned that he was a sort of corpse worked by mechanism. All the resources of art were utilized to disguise this mummy as a young man. A marvelous wig, whiskers, mustaches, and a little imperial, all of a superb black, covered half his face. His face was whitened and rouged with extraordinary skill, and there was not a trace of wrinkles upon it. What had become of them? There is no knowing. He was dressed in the height of fashion, as though he had stepped out of a fashion plate. He had on a visiting jacket or something of the sort. Upon my word, I don't know what exactly, but it was something extremely fashionable and up-to-date, created especially for morning calls. His gloves, his cravat, his waistcoat, his linen, and so on, were all of dazzling freshness and artistic taste. The prince limped a little, but limped so elegantly that it seemed as though it were prescribed by fashion. He had an eyeglass in his eye, the very eye that was itself of glass. The prince was saturated with scent. In talking he drawled certain words in a peculiar way, perhaps from the weakness of old age, perhaps because all his teeth were false, perhaps for the sake of greater dignity. Certain syllables he pronounced with extraordinary sweetness, with a special stress on certain vowels. Yes with him was turned into yes. In all his manners there was a certain carelessness, acquired in the course of his life as a dandy. But if anything of his old fashionable life was still preserved, it was preserved as it were unconsciously in the form of some vague reminiscence, in the form of some outlived buried past, which, alas, no cosmetics, corsets, perfumers, or barbers could bring to life again. And so we shall do well to begin by confessing that if the man had not lost his wits, he had long ago lost his memory, and was now constantly muddled, repeating himself, and even babbling at random. One needed a special knack to talk to him. But Marya Alexandrovna could rely upon herself, and at the sight of the prince she flew into unutterable ecstasy. "But you have not changed in the least!" she exclaimed, seizing her visitor by both hands and making him sit down in the comfortable armchair. "Sit down, Prince, sit down. It's 6 years, 6 whole years since we have met, and not a single letter, not one line all that time. Oh, how badly you have treated me, Prince! How angry I have been with you, Monsieur Prince! But tea! Oh, my goodness, Nastasia Petrovna, tea!" Thank you, I am sorry," the prince lisped. We forgot to say that he lisped a little, but that, too, he did as though it were the fashion. "I am sorry, and only fancy, last year I quite meant to come here," he added, looking round the room through his lorgnette. "But they scared me. You had cholera here, I was told." "No, Prince, we haven't had cholera here," said Marya Alexandrovna. "There was the cattle plague here, uncle," Mozgliakov put in, anxious to distinguish himself. Marya Alexandrovna looked him up and down with a stern expression. "To be sure, cattle plague or something of the sort. So I stayed at home. But how is your husband, my dear Anna Nikolaevna? Still at his prosecuting duties?" "No, Prince," said Marya Alexandrovna, a little disconcerted. "My husband is not prosecutor." "I'll bet uncle has got mixed up and takes you for Anna Nikolaevna Antipov," cried the sharp-witted Mozgliakov, but he pulled himself up at once, observing that Marya Alexandrovna seemed to be wincing apart from these explanations. "Oh, yes, Anna Nikolaevna, and I keep forgetting. Oh, yes, Antipov it is," the prince acquiesced. "No, Prince, you are very much mistaken," said Marya Alexandrovna with a bitter smile. "I am not Anna Nikolaevna, and I must say I didn't at all expect that you wouldn't know me. You have surprised me, Prince. I am your old friend Marya Alexandrovna Moskalev. Do you remember, Prince, Marya Alexandrovna?" "Marya Alexandrovna, only fancy! And I actually supposed that you were, what's her name? Oh, yes, Anna Vassilievna. C'est délicieux. So I have come to the wrong place, and I thought, my dear fellow, that you were taking me to Anna Matveyevna. C'est charmant. It often happens like that with me, though. I often go to the wrong place. I am satisfied, always satisfied, whatever happens. So you are not Nastasia Vassilievna? That's interesting." "Marya Alexandrovna, Prince, Marya Alexandrovna. Oh, how badly you have treated me, to forget your best friend." "Oh, yes, my best friend. Pardon," the prince lisped, gazing at Zina. "That is my daughter Zina. You don't know her, Prince. She was away when you were here last, in the year 18. Do you remember?" "Is that your daughter? Charmant, muttered the prince, eyeing Zina with avidity through his lorgnette. "Mais quelle beauté!" he murmured, evidently struck by her. "Tea, Prince," said Marya Alexandrovna, calling the prince's attention to the page standing before him with a tray in his hands. The prince took the cup and looked attentively at the boy, who had pink and chubby cheeks. "Ah, is this your boy?" he said. "What a pretty boy! And I am sure he behaves nicely." "But, Prince," Marya Alexandrovna interposed hurriedly, "I have heard of your terrible adventure. I must confess I was frightened out of my wits. Weren't you hurt? Make sure. It is not a thing to neglect."
He upset me! The coachman upset me!"
the prince exclaimed with extraordinary animation.
"I thought the end of the world was coming, or something of the sort, and so I must own I was so frightened that, holy saints forgive me, I didn't know whether I was on my head or my feet. I hadn't expected it. I did not expect it at all. And it's all the fault of my coachman, Phil. I rely upon you now entirely, my dear fellow. Do what is necessary and investigate the matter thoroughly. I am persuaded that it was an attempt on my life."
"All right, uncle, all right," answered Pavel Alexandrovitch. "I will investigate it thoroughly. Only listen, uncle, forgive him this once, won't you? What do you say?"
"I won't forgive him on any account. I am persuaded that he was trying to take my life. He, together with Lavrenti, whom I left at home. Only fancy, he has got hold of some new ideas, you know. There is a sort of skepticism in him. In short, he is a communist in the fullest sense of the word. I am positively afraid to meet him."
"Ah, what you say is so true, Prince," exclaimed Marya Alexandrovna. You wouldn't believe what I suffer from these good-for-nothing servants myself. Imagine I have 2 new servants, and I must say they are so stupid that I am simply struggling with them from morning till night. You wouldn't believe how stupid they are, Prince."
Oh, yes, but I must say I really prefer to have a footman rather stupid,"
observed the prince, who, like all old men, was delighted when people listened to his chatter with obsequious attention.
"It somehow suits a footman, and really is a virtue in him if he is simple-hearted and stupid. Only in certain cases, of course. It makes him more imposing. It gives a solemnity to his countenance. It gives him a greater air of good breeding, and what I insist on most is a servant's good breeding. Here I have my Terenti. You remember my Terenti, my dear fellow, don't you? As soon as I looked at him, I predicted that he was destined to be a hall porter. Stupid, phenomenally. He stares like a sheep looking at water. But what imposing dignity, what solemnity, such a pale pink double chin. You know, with a white cravat and full get-up, it does produce an effect. I took the greatest fancy to him. Sometimes I look at him and feel quite fascinated. He might be writing a dissertation, such a solemn air. In fact, he is a regular German philosopher Kant, or perhaps more truly a fat, overfed turkey-cock. Perfectly comme il faut for a manservant."
Marya Alexandrovna laughed with enthusiasm, and even clapped her hands. Pavel Alexandrovitch seconded her with all his heart. He was extremely entertained by his uncle. Nastasia Petrovna laughed too. Even Zina gave a smile. "But what humour, what gaiety, what wit you have, Prince!" exclaimed Marya Alexandrovna. "What a precious gift for noting the most subtle, the most amusing point! And to vanish from society, to shut yourself up for 5 whole years, with such a talent! But you must write, Prince. You might be another von Wiesen, another Grabroyedov, another Gogol."
Oh yes, said the prince, highly delighted. "I might, and do you know I used to be remarkably witty in the old days. I actually wrote a vaudeville for the stage. There were several exquisite lines in it. It was never acted, though. Ah, how charming it would be to read it. And do you know, Zina, it would be apropos now. They are getting up theatricals here, for a patriotic object, Prince, for the benefit of the wounded. Your vaudeville would be the thing." "Of course, I am ready to write it again, indeed, though I have completely forgotten it. But I remember there were 2 or 3 puns such that—"
and the prince kissed his fingertips.
"And altogether, when I was abroad, I made a regular furor. I remember Lord Byron. We were on friendly terms. He danced the Krakowiana enchantingly at the Vienna Congress."
"Lord Byron, uncle? Upon my word, uncle, what do you mean?"
"Oh, yes, Lord Byron. No, perhaps it wasn't Lord Byron, but someone else. Quite so, not Lord Byron, but a Pole. I remember perfectly now, and that Pole was very original. He gave himself out for a count, and it afterwards turned out that he was some sort of head cook. But he did dance the Krakowiana most enchantingly, and at last he broke his leg. I wrote some verses on that occasion, too. 'Our dear little Pole, to dance was his role,' and what came then I can't remember. When he broke his limb, no more capers for him."
"Oh, that must be how it went, uncle," exclaimed Mozgliakov, entering more and more into the spirit of the thing.
"I think that is what it was, my dear fellow," answered the old man, "or something like it. But perhaps it wasn't it, but anyway, the verses turned out very successfully. The fact is, I've forgotten some things that have happened. It comes from being so busy."
"But tell us, Prince, what have you been doing all this time in your solitude?" Marya Alexandrovna inquired with interest. "I have so often thought of you, mon cher prince, that I must confess I am burning now with impatience to have a full account of it all."
"What have I been doing? Well, altogether, you know, I have a great deal to do. Sometimes one rests, and sometimes, you know, I go for walks and imagine all sorts of things."
"You must have a very powerful imagination, uncle."
"Extremely powerful, my dear boy. I sometimes imagine such things that I wonder at myself afterwards. When I was in Khadyuev— apropos, I believe you used to be deputy governor at Khadyuev?"
"I, uncle? Upon my soul, what do you mean?" exclaimed Pavel Alexandrovitch.
"Fancy, my dear fellow, and I have been taking you all the while for the deputy governor, and I was wondering to myself, how is it that all of a sudden you had got quite a different face? He had such a dignified face, intelligent, you know. He was an exceptionally intelligent man, and he was always composing verses on all sorts of occasions. He was a bit like the King of Diamonds in profile."
"No, Prince," Marya Alexandrovna interposed. "I vow you will ruin yourself by living like that. To shut yourself up in solitude for 5 years, to see no one, to hear nothing. But you are a doomed man, Prince. Ask anyone among those who are devoted to you, and everyone will tell you that you are a doomed man."
"Really?"
exclaimed the prince. "I assure you it is so. I am speaking to you as a friend, as a sister. I am speaking to you because you are dear to me, because the memory of the past is sacred to me. What have I to gain by pretending? No, you must reform your life fundamentally, or you will fall sick, you will waste away, you will die."
"Oh, dear me, am I really going to die so soon?"
exclaimed the prince, panic-stricken.
"And do you know, you have guessed right. I am frightfully troubled by hemorrhoids, especially at certain times. And when I have attacks of it, I generally have the most remarkable symptoms. I will tell you all about them. To begin with—"
"Uncle, you will tell about that another time," Pavel Alexandrovitch interposed. "But now, isn't it time for us to start?"
"Oh, yes, another time if you like. Possibly it is not so very interesting to listen to now that I come to think of it. At the same time, it is a very curious complaint. It has several stages. Remind me, my dear boy, I will describe this evening in detail one thing that happened."
"But listen, Prince, you ought to try a cure abroad," Marya Alexandrovna intervened again.
"Abroad? Oh, yes, oh, yes. I certainly shall go abroad. I remember when I was abroad in the 20s, it was wonderfully gay. I almost got married to a French vicomtesse. I was tremendously in love with her at the time, and wanted to devote my life to her. I did not marry her, though. Somebody else did. And such a strange thing happened. I was absent only 2 hours, and the other man won the day. A German baron he was. He was put into a madhouse for a time afterwards.
But, cher Prince, what I meant was that you must think seriously about your health. There are such doctors abroad, and besides, a change of life does so much. You really must abandon your Duhanovo, if only for a time.
Certainly. I have made up my mind to do so long ago. And do you know, I mean to try hydropathy.
Hydropathy?
Hydropathy. I have tried hydropathy once already. I was at the waters then. There was a Moscow lady there. I have forgotten her surname, only she was a very poetical lady, about 70. She had a daughter, too, about 50, a widow with cataract in her eye. She, too, almost talked in verse. Afterward she had a very unfortunate mishap. She killed one of her serf girls in a rage, and was tried for it. And do you know, they took it into their heads to make me try the water cure. I must say I had nothing the matter with me, but they kept insisting, "Try the cure, try the cure." Simply from delicacy I began to drink the waters. I thought I really should be better for it. I drank and drank and drank and drank. I drank up a perfect waterfall. And do you know, hydropathy is really a very good thing, and did me a very great deal of good, so that if I had not fallen ill, I assure you I should have been perfectly well.
That is a very just conclusion, uncle. Tell me, uncle, have you studied logic? Upon my word, what questions you ask! Marya Alexandrovna observed sternly, much scandalized.
I did study it, my dear boy, but very long ago. I studied philosophy, too, in Germany. I went through a whole course, but even at the time I couldn't remember it. But I must own, you have so frightened me about this illness that I feel quite upset. I'll come back directly, though.
But where are you going, Prince? Cried Marya Alexandrovna in amazement.
I will be back directly. I simply want to note down a new idea. Au revoir.
What a specimen! Cried Pavel Alexandrovitch, and he went off into a fit of laughter. Marya Alexandrovna lost patience. I don't understand in the least what you are laughing at, she began with heat. To laugh at a venerable old man, at a relation, to take advantage of his angelic kindness, and to turn every word he utters into ridicule. I blushed for you, Pavel Alexandrovitch. Tell me, please, what do you find absurd in him? I saw nothing to laugh at in him. When he does not know people, when he sometimes talks nonsense. But that is the effect of the awful life he is leading, of his horrible imprisonment for the last 5 years under the eye of that fiendish woman. One ought to pity him and not to laugh at him. He did not even know me. You were a witness of that yourself. That was, so to speak, a flagrant example. He absolutely must be saved. I suggested to him to go abroad simply in the hope that he might get rid of that market woman. Do you know what? We ought to find him a wife, Marya Alexandrovna, cried Pavel Alexandrovitch. Again, you are incorrigible, Monsieur Mozgliakov. No, Marya Alexandrovna, no. This time I am speaking seriously. Why shouldn't we marry him? It's an idea, C'est une idée comme une autre. What harm could it do him? Kindly tell me that. On the contrary, he is in such a position that only such a step could save him. He is still legally able to marry. To begin with, he would be rescued from that trollop, excuse the expression. Secondly, and chiefly, imagine that he picks out a girl, or better still, a widow, sweet, kind, sensible, tender, and, above all, poor, who will look after him like a daughter and realize that he has been a benefactor to her in giving her the title of his wife. And what could be better for him than a noble and upright creature who would belong to him and would be continually at his side, instead of that female? Of course she ought to be pretty, for even to this day Uncle loves a pretty face. Did you notice how he kept looking at Zinaida Afanasievna? But where will you find such a bride? Asked Nastasya Petrovna, listening attentively. Ah, there it is. Why, you, for instance, if you were willing. Allow me to ask, aren't you perfectly suitable as a match for the prince? In the first place, you are pretty. Secondly, you are a widow. Thirdly, you are a lady. Fourthly, poor, for you really are not very well off. Fifthly, you are a very sensible woman, and consequently will love him, keep him in cotton wool, send that person about her business, take him abroad, will feed him on semolina pudding and sweetmeats, all that up to the time when he leaves this transitory world, which will happen within a year and possibly within 2 or 3 months. Then you will be a princess, a wealthy widow, and as a reward for your pluck you can marry a marquis or a general. C'est joli, isn't it? Why, my gracious, I believe I should fall in love with him, poor dear gentleman, out of mere gratitude if only he made me an offer, exclaimed Madame Ziablov, and her dark, expressive eyes gleamed. But that's all nonsense. Nonsense? If you like, it needn't be nonsense. Ask me nicely, and then you may cut off my finger if you are not engaged to him today. Why, there is nothing easier than to persuade or tempt Uncle into anything. He always says, "Oh yes, oh yes." You have heard him yourself. We will marry him so that he will hardly notice it. We will deceive him and marry him, perhaps. Why, it is for his benefit, mercy upon us. You might dress up in your best to be ready for anything, Nastasya Petrovna. Monsieur Mozgliakov's enthusiasm knew no bounds. Sensible though she might be, Madame Ziablov's mouth watered. I know I look a perfect slut today without your telling me, she replied. I have grown shockingly careless. I have no ambition. That's how it is I go about such a grub. Why, do I really look like a cook? All this time Marya Alexandrovna was sitting with a strange look on her face. I am not mistaken if I say that she heard Pavel Alexandrovitch's strange proposition with a sort of dismay, as though disconcerted by it. At last she recovered herself. All that is very nice, no doubt, but it is all nonsense and absurdity, and what is more, quite out of place, she interrupted Mozgliakov sharply. But why, my dear Marya Alexandrovna, why is it nonsense and out of place? For many reasons, and first of all because you are in my house and the prince is my guest, and I allow no one to show a lack of respect for my house. I look upon your words as nothing but a jest, Pavel Alexandrovitch. But thank goodness, here is the prince. Here I am, cried the prince, walking into the room. It's wonderful, cher ami, how many different ideas I've had today. And at other times, perhaps you wouldn't believe it, I seem to have none at all, nothing all day. That's probably from your tumble today, uncle. It has upset your nerves, and that is how it is.
I put it down to that myself, my dear fellow, and I think that the accident has been really beneficial, so that I have made up my mind to forgive my Théophile. Do you know what? I believe he was not trying to take my life after all. What do you think? Besides, he has been punished only lately by having his beard shaved off.
His beard shaved off, uncle? Why, he has a beard as big as the German Empire.
Oh, yes, as big as the German Empire. You are generally very correct in your conclusions, my dear boy. But it is a false one, and only fancy how it happened. I was sent a price list, the super best beards for coachmen and gentlemen, newly imported from abroad, also whiskers, imperials, moustaches, and so on, and all of the best quality and at the most moderate prices. I thought I would send for a beard just to see what it was like. So I wrote for a coachman's beard. It really was a beard worth seeing. But it turned out that Théophile had a beard of his own almost twice as big. Of course we were puzzled what to do, to shave his off or to send back the one they had sent us and let him wear his natural one. I thought and thought about it, and came to the conclusion that it was better for him to have the artificial one.
Probably because art is better than nature, uncle.
That was just it. And what distress it caused him when his beard was shaved off, as though he had parted with his whole career together with his beard. But isn't it time for us to start, my dear boy?
I am ready, uncle. But I hope, Prince, that you are only going to the governor's, Marya Alexandrovna exclaimed in excitement. You are mine now, Prince, and belong to my family for the whole day. I am not going to tell you anything about the society here, of course. Perhaps you want to go to Anna Nikolaevna's, and I have not the right to disillusion you. Besides, I am fully persuaded that time will tell its own story. But remember that I am your hostess, sister, nurse for the whole of today, and I must own that I tremble for you, Prince. You don't know these people. You don't yet know them. Rely on me, Marya Alexandrovna. Everything shall be as I promised you, said Mozgliakov.
Oh, you featherhead! Rely on you! I expect you to dinner, Prince. We dine early. And how I regret that on this occasion my husband is in the country. How delighted he would have been to see you. He has such a respect for you. He has such a genuine affection for you. Your husband? So you have a husband too? The prince queried. Oh, my goodness, how forgetful you are, Prince. Why, you have utterly forgotten all the past. My husband, Afanasy Matveyitch, surely you have not forgotten him? He is in the country now, but you have seen him 1,000 times in old days. Do you remember, Prince, Afanasy Matveyitch? Afanasy Matveyitch, in the country, only fancy. Mais c'est délicieux. So you have a husband too? What a strange thing, though. That's exactly like some vaudeville. The husband's on the stair, but the wife has gone to... Excuse me, I have forgotten. Only the wife had gone off somewhere also, to Tula or to Yaroslav. Anyway, it's very funny.
The husband is on the stair, but the wife has gone to Tver, uncle, Mozgliakov prompted him.
Oh, yes, thank you, my dear boy, Tver it was. Charmant, charmant, so that it rhymes also. You always drop into rhyme, my dear boy. I didn't remember whether it was to Yaroslav or to Kostroma. but only that his wife had gone off somewhere too. Charmant, charmant. I have a little forgotten what I was beginning to speak about, though. Ah, yes, so we are starting, my dear fellow. Au revoir, madame. Adieu, ma charmante demoiselle, added the prince, turning to Zina and kissing his fingertips. To dinner, prince. Don't forget to make haste back, Marya Alexandrovna called after him. Breaking in. The multiple cultural and historical references that make their way into this chapter serve to highlight the prince's generation and his place within it. When Marya Alexandrovna mentions 3 comic writers that the prince might rival with his witticisms, 2 of them had already been dead for decades. Denis von Wiesen's comic plays had appeared in the 18th century, before Alexander Griboyedov published Woe from Wit in 1825. Nikolai Gogol was more contemporary, but even he had been dead for 5 years before Dostoevsky started work on Uncle's Dream. Immanuel Kant was one of the most influential philosophers of Western history, and the father of German idealism, which would have been popular in early 19th century Russia, and apparently was what our uncle was studying in his youth. Indeed, German idealism was one of the wellsprings of the communism of Karl Marx, which so terrifies the prince. Kant was anything but stupid, which enhances the absurdity of the comparison to the footman. A related idea, and a more important one for our story, is Romanticism, and of course Byron was one of the most important Romantic British poets. He would be unlikely to have been dancing at the Congress of Vienna. Then again, a cook from Poland would have had little to celebrate there himself. The Congress of Vienna redrew the European map in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, and Poland lost much of its land to Russia in the process. As it was a reaction to French aggression, the Congress was an anti-republican, pro-aristocratic affair, thus promoting the interests of figures like the prince. A more contemporary political allusion in the text concerns Marya Alexandrovna's reference to wounded soldiers, who were the intended audience of the new local theatricals. These soldiers would have been veterans of the Crimean War, which the Russians lost in 1856. The prince is, of course, the most clownish figure in the book. But curiously, in correspondence, Dostoevsky once referred to him as the single serious figure in the story. That may seem strange, and yet if there is a serious moment in this chapter, it is the prince's casual reference to a woman who beat a serf girl to death and had to suffer the misfortune of being tried for it. This isn't the only such moment in the text. More on this later. End of comments.